How could you do this to me, John? I remember yelling those words like it was yesterday, even though it's been over a year now. I was 6 months pregnant, standing in the doorway of our living room, shaking with anger and disbelief. He just stood there, arms crossed, his face blank like I was the one causing a problem. That was the moment I realized everything I thought we had built together was a lie. My name is Melissa Harper. I'm 32 years old now, and I'm a single mom to my beautiful 1-year-old daughter, Emma. Life looks nothing like I thought it would, but in some ways it's better. A little over a year ago, I was blindsided by betrayal that turned my world upside down, leaving me to figure out how to move forward while preparing to welcome my little girl into the world. In those early weeks after John left, I felt like I was drowning. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, heard his voice saying those awful things. "I'm not attracted to you anymore, Melissa. Look at you. You've let yourself go." Those words echoed in my mind, cutting deeper every time I thought of them. And Julia, my so-called best friend? She didn't even have the guts to look me in the eye. I never confronted her. I didn't see the point. I just cut her out of my life like she never existed. I struggled through the rest of my pregnancy alone, emotionally and financially. John didn't just leave me. He abandoned Emma too. Not a single text, not a dime to help. My mom tried her best to be there for me, but I could tell it broke her heart to see me like that. I put on a brave face for everyone, but at night, when the house was quiet, I'd cry until I was too exhausted to stay awake. It all started when my friend Karen showed up at my door, her face pale and her expression uneasy. I could tell something was wrong the second I saw her. "Melissa, I need to talk to you," she said as she stepped inside. She hesitated for a moment, like she was trying to find the right words. "I saw John today, with Julia. They were coming out of a hotel together. I didn't want to believe it, but they kissed. Right there in the hallway." I felt my stomach drop. For a moment, I couldn't process what she was saying. John, my husband, and Julia, my best friend? My heart pounded as the shock turned to anger, and I asked Karen every question that rushed into my head. Where? When? Are you sure? But I already knew she wouldn't lie about something like this. It was as if my world had tilted on its axis, and I couldn't find my footing. I still asked, "What do you mean? A hotel? Why would you be in a hotel? Are you sure? This is a serious accusation." My voice trembled as I spoke, hoping for some kind of explanation that would make it all go away. Karen nodded solemnly, her eyes full of pity and regret. "My cousins were visiting, staying at that hotel. I was on my way to their room when I saw them. Melissa, I know what I saw. They didn't see me, but they were coming out of a room together. They kissed, right there in the hallway." She paused, her voice softening. "I'm so sorry, but you needed to know." Hearing her say it again, so matter-of-factly, was like a punch to the gut. My chest tightened, and tears stung my eyes as the reality of it all began to sink in. I sat down on the couch, unable to catch my breath. My world was falling apart right there in my living room. The man I had trusted, the man I was building a family with, had been sneaking around with my best friend. And Julia? She'd been in my life for years, the person I turned to when things got tough. How could they do this to me? How could they betray me like this, especially now, when I was carrying our child? I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. Anger, humiliation, heartbreak, all tangled up in a knot I couldn't unravel. Every memory, every promise, every plan we'd made together suddenly felt like a cruel joke. I couldn't stop myself from wondering, had I been blind? Was there something I'd missed? Or was I just that easy to discard? The weight of it all pressed down on me, and for the first time in my life, I truly felt like I was breaking. That night, I waited for John to come home, my stomach in knots and my heart pounding in my chest. When I heard his car in the driveway, I felt a surge of both anger and dread. He walked in like it was any other day, setting his keys on the counter and loosening his tie. I didn't even let him get past the kitchen. "How long has it been, John?" I asked, my voice trembling but steady. He looked up, confused, and then his expression hardened. "What are you talking about?" he said, feigning ignorance. "Don't play games with me," I snapped. "Karen saw you, at the hotel, with Julia. Now tell me the truth." His face twisted into a scowl and he scoffed. "Karen? That woman's nuts. She probably misunderstood something. Melissa, you're letting your imagination run wild. There's nothing going on." But his tone was defensive, and his refusal to meet my eyes told me all I needed to know. I clenched my fists, feeling my anger rise with every word he said. "Don't you dare lie to me, John," I shouted, my voice breaking. "Karen isn't nuts, and you know it. She saw you, with Julia, leaving a hotel room. She saw you kiss her, so don't stand there and insult my intelligence." He threw his hands up in frustration, pacing the room like he was the one being wronged. "Melissa, you're blowing this out of proportion," he snapped. "Karen probably saw something innocent and twisted it in her head. Julia and I are just friends, that's all." But his excuses sounded pathetic, and the more he talked, the more I could see the guilt written all over his face. It was like he was trying to talk himself out of the hole he'd already dug. As he continued spewing his excuses, I felt a sudden flutter in my stomach. Emma. She moved, as if reminding me she was there, a tiny life depending on me in the middle of all this chaos. For a second, the anger was replaced by a wave of sadness so heavy it nearly crushed me. How could he do this to us? To her? I put my hand on my belly instinctively, trying to steady myself. "Do you even care about us, John?" I asked, my voice quieter but laced with heartbreak. "Do you care about your daughter? She's in here and she can feel this. Feel me falling apart because of you." His eyes flicked to my belly for a brief moment, but instead of softening, his face stayed cold and unreadable. "This isn't about the baby," he said flatly. "Don't make this more dramatic than it needs to be." It was in that moment I knew. I was truly on my own. I felt tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall in front of him. "More dramatic?" I repeated, my voice trembling with disbelief. "I'm 6 months pregnant, John. 6 months. And you're telling me it's not dramatic that you're sneaking around with my best friend? That you've destroyed our family before our daughter even has a chance to be born?" My voice rose with every word, my heartbreak morphing into a fiery rage I couldn't hold back anymore. John sighed as if he was the one being inconvenienced. "Melissa, you're blowing this out of proportion," he said, shaking his head. "Julia and it just happened, okay? I can't help how I feel. Things haven't been the same between us for a while, and honestly, look at yourself. You've changed." He motioned toward me, his words dripping with contempt. "I'm not attracted to you anymore, Melissa. I'm sorry, but it's the truth." John scoffed, shaking his head like I was wasting his time. "God, Melissa, do you even hear yourself?" he snapped, his voice ice cold. "You've been nothing but a whiny, overgrown baby ever since you got pregnant. Every day it's something. Your back hurts, your feet are swollen, you're tired. I get it, you're pregnant, but you act like you're the first woman in the world to have a kid. It's pathetic." He looked me up and down, his expression twisting into disgust. "And don't even get me started on how you look," he said, his voice dropping to a cruel sneer. "You're massive. Honestly, Melissa, you're starting to look like a damn elephant waddling around here. It's embarrassing. You don't even try to look decent anymore. It's just sweatpants and your greasy hair tied up in that ugly bun. Julia? She's gorgeous. She actually takes care of herself and she's fun to be around. You're just a moody, needy mess, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise." He stared at me, his words hanging in the air like poison, and I felt my entire body go numb. I stood there, frozen, unable to find the words. How could he be so cruel? I had braced myself for denial, for excuses, but not for this. The man who had once promised to love me, who I thought was my partner, was standing in front of me, tearing me apart piece by piece. It wasn't enough that he had betrayed me. that he had thrown away our marriage and our family for my best friend. Now he was humiliating me, stripping away every last bit of dignity I had left. My throat tightened, and I felt the sting of tears in my eyes, but I refused to cry in front of him. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. "You don't even care," I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. "Not about me, not about Emma, not about anything we built together." He just shrugged, his expression cold and indifferent. "I've moved on, Melissa," he said flatly. "Maybe you should too." His words hit me like a slap, and I realized in that moment that the man I once loved didn't exist anymore. The next day, I packed whatever I could fit into a few suitcases and left. I couldn't stay in that house, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer existed. Every corner reminded me of him, of us, and it felt like the walls were closing in on me. My mom had offered weeks ago for me to stay with her if I needed support during the pregnancy, and now I had no choice but to take her up on it. When I arrived at her house, she was waiting at the door, her arms open and her face full of worry. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly, pulling me into a hug. The moment I felt her embrace, I broke down, sobbing into her shoulder like a child. It was the first time I had let myself cry since Karen told me the truth. "It's going to be okay, Melissa," she whispered, holding me tightly. "You and Emma are going to be okay. I'm here, and we'll get through this together." For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt safe. Broken, but safe. The days at my mom's house were quieter, but not easier. She did her best to cheer me up, cooking my favorite meals, sitting with me in the evenings, talking about everything but John. But the silence was deafening when she wasn't around. I spent hours staring at the nursery items I had brought with me, folding and refolding Emma's tiny clothes, wondering how I was going to do this alone. Every now and then, I'd catch myself picking up my phone, tempted to call John, to scream at him, to demand how he could walk away from us so easily. But I stopped myself every time. What was the point? He made it clear who he was, what he cared about, and it wasn't me or his daughter. Instead, I put all my focus on Emma, reminding myself that she was the reason I had to stay strong. For her, I couldn't let him destroy me. After a few weeks, it was like John had vanished from my life entirely. No calls, no texts, no questions about the baby, nothing. It was as if he had erased us from his world, like we had never existed to him. At first, I checked my phone obsessively, half hoping, half dreading that he might reach out, but there was nothing. Eventually, I stopped checking. I told myself it was better this way. No reminders, no lingering false hopes, just silence. It was strange, though. The man who had been such a constant presence in my life for years now felt like a ghost. When I moved into my mom's house, I packed away every photo of him, every trace of him from my old life, and tucked them into a box I shoved into the back of the closet. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about him, not in longing, but in disbelief. How could someone just disappear from their own child's life before it had even begun? It was like John had never existed, but his absence was loud and it echoed in every moment I was left to face alone. Months passed, each one harder than the last. Pregnancy wasn't kind to me. I was constantly exhausted, and the stress of doing everything alone weighed heavily on me. My mom was a lifesaver, but there were still nights when I cried myself to sleep, wondering how I ended up here. The idea of bringing Emma into the world without her father, without the life I had envisioned for her, filled me with guilt. But every time I felt her move, it reminded me that she was my reason to keep going. She was the only good thing to come out of this mess. When Emma finally arrived, she was perfect. I'll never forget the moment I held her for the first time. Her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and I felt this overwhelming wave of love wash over me. For the first time in months, I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. It didn't matter that John wasn't there. It didn't matter that he had chosen to walk away. In that moment, all that mattered was Emma, and she was mine. My beautiful, precious little girl. She was worth every tear, every sleepless night, every bit of pain. The first few weeks with Emma were a whirlwind. Between the late-night feedings and figuring out how to be a mom, I barely had time to think about anything else. She had the most beautiful eyes, big and bright, full of wonder, and when she looked at me, it felt like everything was going to be okay. My mom helped a lot, but I made sure to do as much as I could on my own. I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe even to John, though he was long gone, that I could do this without him. Still, there were moments when the loneliness crept in. I'd see dads doting on their kids at the grocery store or hear friends talk about their partners helping with nighttime feeds, and it stung. But then I'd look at Emma, and all the sadness faded. She was my world now, and every smile she gave me, every little coo, made it all worth it. I didn't need John to be happy. I had everything I needed right there in my arms. Weeks later, when life with Emma started to feel a little more manageable, I decided to venture out to the mall. My mom offered to watch Emma for a few hours so I could get some time to myself, something I hadn't done since before she was born. It felt strange leaving the house without her, but I knew I needed the break. Just walking through the brightly lit corridors, surrounded by people going about their lives, was a reminder that the world hadn't stopped turning even when mine had felt like it had. I wandered aimlessly for a while, stopping to browse in a few baby stores, picking out a couple of outfits for Emma. I was just starting to feel a sense of normalcy when I heard a voice call out my name. "Melissa?" I turned, and my heart stopped. It was Julia. She looked different, her face pale, her eyes red and puffy, and there was no mistaking the slight swell of her stomach. Before I could react, she rushed toward me, her voice breaking. "Melissa, I'm so sorry," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks as she grabbed my arm. I froze, completely caught off guard. Julia, the woman who had shattered my life, was standing in front of me, crying like a child. She didn't seem like the confident, manipulative person I remembered. Her shoulders were slumped, her clothes wrinkled, and her hands trembled as she wiped her face. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," she sobbed, her words tumbling over each other. "But I need to tell you everything." I didn't say a word. I just stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for her to continue. "John left me," she choked out. He lost his job a few months after we got together and things got bad. He started gambling, drinking, and when I told him I was pregnant, he just left. He said he couldn't handle it. She covered her face, her body shaking with sobs. "I don't know what to do, Melissa. I'm so sorry for everything I did to you. You didn't deserve any of it." She broke down right there in the middle of the mall, people glancing at us as they walked by, but I didn't care. I couldn't move. I just stared at her, a wave of mixed emotions flooding through me. Julia kept sobbing, her voice breaking as she pleaded with me. "Please, Melissa, I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to forgive me. I was selfish and stupid, and I ruined everything. I wish I could take it all back. Please, I'm begging you." Her words hung in the air, but I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at her, feeling an odd mix of pity, anger, and satisfaction. For so long, I had dreamed of a moment like this, of her realizing the pain she'd caused and begging for my forgiveness. But now that it was happening, I felt nothing. Not even a flicker of the satisfaction I'd expected. I looked at her one last time, her face streaked with tears, and without saying a word, I turned and walked away, leaving her there in the middle of the mall. When I got home, as if the day hadn't already been surreal enough, I had the second surprise waiting for me. Sitting on the front steps, slouched like a man who'd lost everything, was John. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. He looked so different, unkempt, exhausted, and reeking of alcohol. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled, and he barely looked like the man I used to know. He looked up as I approached, his eyes bloodshot and glassy. "Melissa," he muttered, struggling to stand. I needed to see you. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as a wave of anger surged through me. I couldn't believe this was happening, that after everything he'd done, he had the audacity to show up here. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharp and unforgiving. He staggered slightly, leaning against the doorframe. I'm sorry," he stammered. "I love you, Melissa. I love Emma. Please let me come back. I'll fix everything. I swear I will." His voice cracked, but all I felt was disgust and a cold, biting clarity. He smelled of alcohol so strongly that it hit me before I could even respond. "Sorry?" I repeated, my voice thick with disbelief. "You're sorry? You left me, left us, without a second thought, and now you're here smelling like a bar, talking about feeling sorry and loving us?" John ran a hand through his messy hair, his shoulders slumping like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. "I know, Melissa," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I've screwed up. I've lost everything. You, Emma, my job, my money. I've been such an idiot, and I can't stop thinking about what I threw away. I love you. I love Emma. I do. Please, just give me a chance to make it right." For a moment, I just stared at him, my emotions a storm of anger, pity, and something I couldn't quite name. This was the man I had once built my world around, the father of my child, now reduced to this broken shell. "You love us?" I said, my voice trembling. "Where was that love when I was 6 months pregnant and you walked out on me? Where was it when Emma was born and I was in the hospital alone? You abandoned us, John. You don't get to show up now and play the victim." He staggered slightly, holding onto the doorframe for support. "I know," he whispered, tears welling up in his bloodshot eyes. "I know I don't deserve anything from you. But I've changed, Melissa. I can change. Please, just let me be a part of Emma's life. I'll do anything." I felt a lump rise in my throat as I watched him fall apart. A part of me wanted to believe him, to reach out and offer some kind of comfort to the man I had once loved so deeply. But the memory of all the pain he'd caused, all the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering how I would do this alone, kept me grounded. "No, John," I said finally, my voice steady but heavy with emotion. "You're not part of my life anymore. Emma and we're better off without you. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." He broke down, his sobs quiet but heart-wrenching, and for a brief moment, I felt sorry for him. But I knew I had to stay strong, for myself and for Emma. Without another word, I stepped past him, unlocked the door, and closed it behind me, leaving him outside in the dark. Inside, I leaned against the door, the weight of the day finally hitting me. In one day, both people who had nearly destroyed my life, John and Julia, had shown up, broken and ruined by their own choices. I didn't have to lift a finger for it to happen. They had done it to themselves, consumed by the same selfishness and deceit that had shattered my world over a year ago. I thought back to everything I'd been through, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the sleepless nights wondering how I would raise Emma on my own. Through it all, I had lived my life with dignity, focusing on my daughter and rebuilding my own sense of worth. And now, here I was, standing tall, while the people who once tore me down were left to face the wreckage of their actions. I climbed the stairs quietly and peeked into Emma's room. She was fast asleep, her tiny face peaceful and perfect in the soft glow of the nightlight. I leaned down and kissed her forehead, feeling a surge of gratitude and love. This was my life now, and it was going to be beautiful. Hey there! Did you like the story? If you did, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot and makes sure you won't miss out on more great stories we share here. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.